General Hospital spoilers for Monday, August 11th, predict the mood in Port Charles seems heavier, as if the tension simmering behind closed doors is beginning to seep into every corner of town. The morning is impossibly peaceful, sunlight streaming through the hospital windows and warming the pale bricks, but for Elizabeth Baldwin, the peace is an illusion. She's been warned by friends, by her own instincts, that Drew Cain is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Still, she thinks she can stay away from him. But she's wrong. It started in the staff corridor just after noon. Elizabeth had been reviewing patient files when she caught sight of Drew lingering near the nurse's station. His eyes weren't on her, though. They were locked on Willow Tate, who was speaking quietly to another nurse, her head tilted in that soft, reassuring way she had when she was trying to comfort someone. Elizabeth knew the look on Drew's face, there was nothing soft or reassuring about it. His jaw was tight, his hands flexing at his sides, as if he was willing himself not to make a move. But then, without warning, he did. Elizabeth stepped forward quickly, positioning herself between Drew and Willow before he could get too close. "Drew, this isn't the time or place," she told him, her voice low but firm. But the warning only seemed to ignite something in him. His mouth curled into a cold smile, and with a speed that made Elizabeth's stomach twist, he advanced on her instead. The confrontation escalated in seconds. Words turned sharp, Drew's voice rising in the emptying corridor, and when Elizabeth refused to step aside, his temper snapped. He grabbed her arm, hard enough to make her gasp, and in the struggle that followed, Elizabeth stumbled. Her back struck the corner of the counter, pain shooting up her side. She managed to stay on her feet, but her breath was ragged, and the sting in her ribs told her she might not be able to for long. Willow had seen it all from just a few steps away. For a moment she froze, shock rooting her to the floor. Then her fury overtook her hesitation. She lunged toward Drew, shoving at his chest with all the strength she had. "Get away from her," she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. But Drew barely flinched. His hands came up, catching Willow by the shoulders, and in a single motion he overpowered her. She fought, clawing at his grip, but he was stronger and far more intent on proving his control. The scene dissolved into chaos, Elizabeth trying to pull Willow free, Willow refusing to back down despite the futility, Drew's anger boiling into something darker. The commotion drew a few startled nurses, but by the time help arrived, the damage had been done. Willow's lip was split, Elizabeth was clutching her side, and Drew had stormed away with the look of a man who believed he'd won. Across town, another kind of battle was unfolding. Lulu Spencer and Dante Falconeri had spent the better part of the morning arguing about what to do about Liesl Albrecht. Their son, Rocco, had made it abundantly clear that he wanted to spend more time with her, a decision that made Dante bristle. He didn't trust Liesl, not with Rocco, not with anything. Lulu tried to remind him that Rocco was old enough to form his own opinions, but Dante's jaw was set in that stubborn way that meant he wasn't going to let it go. They tried reasoning with Liesl first. She was polite enough, even warm at moments, but there was an unshakable resolve in her eyes. "Rocco is my grandson," she said simply, "and he wishes to be with me. I would never harm him, Dante. You know this, deep down." When persuasion failed, Dante and Lulu turned to Laura Collins, hoping she might mediate. Laura listened carefully, her brow furrowed, but in the end, she could only shake her head. Liesl had done nothing wrong, and Rocco's happiness seemed genuine. Without any wrongdoing to point to, Laura couldn't justify stepping in. That left Dante and Lulu in an uneasy stalemate, forced to accept the situation while quietly dreading where it might lead. Far from Port Charles, Britt Westbourne was indulging in the kind of escape most people only dreamed of. The Five Poppies resort in Croatia was bathed in golden sunlight, its balconies draped in bright flowers, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond. Britt sat at a shaded table, sipping something cold and potent, when Professor Henry Dalton appeared. He was exactly as she remembered, precise in speech, eyes sharp behind his glasses, a man who seemed to know more than he ever said aloud. Their conversation was quiet but charged, layered with a tension that made it impossible to tell whether they were allies or adversaries. It was in that moment, with Dalton leaning slightly closer, that Britt felt the unmistakable weight of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder and saw him, Jason Morgan. Standing at the edge of the patio, his gaze locked on her. Britt didn't flinch. Instead, she turned back to Dalton, her voice calm as she told him something that made his brows lift in surprise. When the resort's manager approached moments later, Britt's patience snapped. "I said I wanted privacy," she told him sharply, her tone daring him to push further. Then, for the benefit of anyone listening, including Jason, she added, "I'm not afraid of our mutual boss." "You can tell him that." Back in Port Charles, Carly Spencer was treading dangerous waters without realizing how deep they ran. Her connection with Jack Brennan had started innocently enough, shared dinners, quiet conversations, but there was an intensity in his eyes that hinted at something more. Carly didn't yet know that Brennan had played a hand in one of the darkest chapters of her life, manipulating her daughter Jocelyn Jacks into becoming a covert operative for the WSB. That truth was coming, and when it did, it would shatter more than just their growing closeness. Meanwhile, Anna Devane was wrestling with a decision she had avoided for weeks. She knew too much about Brennan, about Jocelyn's involvement, and about the kind of danger Jason was walking into without realizing it. She found Jason in the lobby of the Metro Court, his expression unreadable, and told him everything she knew. The look in his eyes shifted, cold concern, protective instinct, and she could see that her words had landed exactly where she intended. Jason's mind went instantly to the worst-case scenario. If Jocelyn was at the resort, as Anna suspected, and if Brennan was there too, the girl could already be in over her head. Jason made a silent vow to get to her before she did something reckless. But when he finally arrived in Croatia, the scene that greeted him was nothing like what he had pictured, and far more dangerous. Back in Port Charles, Alexis Davis was deep in thought. The events of the past months had made her question nearly every choice she had made, especially where her family was concerned. She found herself staring at the adoption papers for Scout Kane, wondering if it was time to step forward and take full custody. The thought filled her with equal parts hope and dread, but she couldn't shake it. Scout deserved stability, and if Alexis had to fight for it, she would. Elsewhere, Jordan Ashford was discovering that some temptations were harder to resist than others. She had told herself the last time with Curtis was just that, the last time. But as soon as they were alone together, the air thickened with familiarity and heat. Whatever they told themselves about boundaries and common sense vanished in an instant, replaced by something that was as inevitable as it was reckless. Jason lingered in the shadows near the edge of the resort grounds, his eyes constantly scanning the movements of every guest and staff member, his instincts screaming that something was about to go wrong. The tropical air was heavy with the scent of salt and flowers, yet underneath it was a current of tension. He had failed to intercept Jocelyn earlier when she slipped away toward the more secluded areas of the Five Poppies resort, and now the knowledge that Brennan was somewhere nearby made his chest tighten. Anna's words echoed in his mind. Jocelyn wasn't just in danger, she was being manipulated, shaped into something she could never come back from. Jason knew that if Brennan's hold over her solidified, there would be no undoing it. The thought of losing her to that world, the one he knew all too well, ignited a fury that made his pulse pound. He pressed deeper into the resort, weaving past sunbathers and uniformed staff, until he reached a narrow staircase leading to the private marina. If Brennan was meeting her, this was the perfect place, isolated, yet close enough to slip onto a boat and vanish into open waters. Inside one of the bungalows, Carly was pacing, her mind racing through every interaction she had shared with Brennan over the past weeks. The man had a way of making her feel seen, understood, even respected, a rarity since Sonny had drifted further into his own battles. But that growing connection had curdled into suspicion after she caught subtle hints in his words, references that didn't add up, and an unsettling familiarity in the way he seemed to know Jocelyn's habits. Now, with pieces falling into place, Carly's stomach churned. She had always been fiercely protective of her daughter, and the idea that Brennan had been pulling Jocelyn's strings, grooming her into a pawn for the WSB, lit a fire in her veins. But confronting him now, without proof, could tip her hand and send him fleeing, or worse, push him into doing something reckless with Jocelyn. Carly decided she would play along for a little while longer, gather evidence, and then bring him down hard. She didn't realize that Jason was already moving in, following a parallel path toward the same target. Meanwhile, back in Port Charles, Alexis sat in her office with Scout's photo in her hand, her expression a storm of longing and determination. The chaos surrounding Drew, the violence, and the unpredictable nature of his life had reawakened an old fear in her, the fear of her child being dragged into dangerous worlds before she was old enough to understand them. Alexis knew the courts would see the stability she could offer Scout, especially now. Still, the legal battle would be fierce, and it would likely force her to dredge up details she would rather keep buried. Her thoughts shifted to Christina's troubles, the risks her daughter had faced, and how quickly safety could unravel. Alexis promised herself that this time, she would fight harder, fight smarter, and not let pride or fear stop her from protecting her family. Jordan, on the other hand, had no such restraints in mind as she sat in the dimly lit back office of the Savoy with Curtis. The low hum of jazz filled the air, mixing with the scent of aged whiskey and the faint warmth of his cologne. They hadn't planned this meeting to be intimate. It had begun with talk of recent security breaches and the shifting balance of power in Port Charles, but somewhere between the shared confidences and the lingering glances, the line blurred again. Their connection had always been complicated, tangled with history and missed chances, but in moments like this, neither of them cared about the past or the consequences. The world outside might be crumbling, alliances shifting, and secrets surfacing, but here, in the quiet shadows of the Savoy, they found something dangerously close to comfort. Back at the resort, Britt's conversation with Professor Dalton had taken on a more guarded tone now that Jason had spotted them. She could feel his eyes even if he wasn't close enough to confront her yet. Dalton was speaking in riddles, touching on research and operations Britt suspected were tied to their elusive mutual boss. When she excused herself and moved toward the bar, she found her manager waiting with a silent question in his eyes. She shut him down immediately, telling him she wasn't afraid of the man they both answered to. It was a bold statement, but one she wasn't entirely sure she believed. The truth was, fear had been gnawing at her since she arrived in Croatia, and Jason's presence only confirmed that whatever was unfolding was far more dangerous than she'd prepared for. Lulu and Dante's efforts to keep Liesl away from Rocco had reached an impasse. Rocco's insistence on spending time with Liesl, coupled with Liesl's careful avoidance of anything that could be construed as harmful, had left Laura in a difficult position. She understood their concerns but couldn't justify forcibly keeping a grandmother figure away from a boy who clearly wanted her company. Still, Laura warned Liesl privately that she would be watching closely, and that any hint of manipulation or deceit would bring their arrangement to an abrupt end. Liesl only smiled, her eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and something unreadable. Whether her intentions were pure or not remained a mystery, one Dante wasn't willing to gamble on for long. In another corner of the resort grounds, Jason finally caught sight of Jocelyn, her blonde hair catching the moonlight as she stood near the end of the pier. Brennan was with her, speaking in low tones, his body angled protectively yet possessively toward her. Jason's heart hammered, every instinct telling him to move now before Brennan could finish whatever pitch he was making. But as he took a step forward, a shadow moved between them, Britt, appearing suddenly as if out of nowhere, her expression tense. Jason realized with a sinking feeling that whatever was happening here was bigger than Brennan and Jocelyn. The threads were tangled, involving multiple players with their own agendas, and if he made the wrong move, the fallout could destroy more than one life. He knew he was running out of time to act, but the question that burned in his mind was whether saving Jocelyn meant exposing her to the truth or keeping her in the dark just a little longer. The air on the pier thickened, as if the warm Croatian night was holding its breath. Jason stayed low, his boots silent on the weathered boards as he closed the distance. Brennan's voice carried just enough for him to catch fragments, words like opportunity, protection, and control, phrases Jason had heard in countless recruitment pitches before. Jocelyn's brow was furrowed, her arms crossed in a defensive stance, but she wasn't walking away. That alone twisted something in Jason's chest. She wasn't seeing the danger for what it was, she was seeing a doorway to something she thought she could handle. Britt stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Brennan and Jocelyn, her body language tight and deliberate. It was a calculated move, protective on the surface, but Jason knew her well enough to see the layers. She was playing both sides, buying time. Brennan glanced at Britt, irritation flickering in his eyes, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he shifted his tone, speaking more urgently, his gaze darting toward the far end of the pier where a sleek motorboat bobbed in the dark water. Jason's gut told him that was their exit plan. If Brennan got Jocelyn on that boat, she'd be gone before anyone could stop him. In Port Charles, Carly's phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number, 5 poppies. Marina. Now. Her heart kicked into overdrive. She didn't question how they got her number or why they wanted her there, she already knew. She grabbed her bag and was out the door, praying she wasn't too late. Meanwhile, Alexis sat at her desk with court documents spread before her. She could feel the weight of what she was about to do. Every page represented a battle that would pit her against a man already unraveling. But if Drew's volatility was putting Scout in harm's way, she had no choice. Her hands trembled for a moment before she stilled them. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about saving her child from being collateral damage in a war she didn't choose. Back at the pier, Jason made his move. He stepped out from the shadows, his voice cutting through the night. "Jocelyn. We're leaving. Now." The sharpness in his tone froze her in place. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression calm, almost amused. "You're too late, Morgan. She's already made her choice." Jocelyn's gaze darted between them, confusion and anger battling in her eyes. "You don't get to decide for me," she snapped at Jason. But before she could take another step toward Brennan, Britt grabbed her arm, her nails biting into her skin just enough to get her attention. "Listen to him," Britt hissed under her breath. Carly arrived then, her heels clicking against the dock, her voice sharp with panic. "Jocelyn." She sprinted toward them, her fear making her reckless. Brennan's hand shifted subtly toward the small of his back, and Jason knew what was coming. In one fluid motion, Jason lunged, shoving Jocelyn behind him just as Brennan drew a weapon. The shot rang out, shattering the calm night air, and a seagull screeched overhead as chaos erupted. Britt grabbed Jocelyn and pulled her toward the marina steps while Jason closed in on Brennan. The two men collided, their struggle brutal and silent except for the sound of fists connecting and the splash of water as they slammed into the railing. Brennan fought like a man who'd been trained to survive at any cost, but Jason's fury gave him an edge. He twisted Brennan's arm, sending the gun skittering across the pier, then slammed him down hard. By the time local security arrived, alerted by a combination of the gunshot and Carly's frantic yelling, Brennan was on his knees, Jason's forearm locked across his throat. He was taken away without a word, his expression unreadable. But Jason knew this wasn't over. Men like Brennan always had contingencies, and this had been just one move in a much larger game. Jocelyn, shaken but unhurt, clung to Carly, her earlier defiance replaced by quiet shock. Carly held her close, but her eyes were locked on Jason, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Whatever came next, they were united in one thing: Brennan would never get near Jocelyn again. Far from the marina, in a quiet corner of the Savoy, Jordan and Curtis sat in comfortable silence, unaware of the chaos unfolding oceans away. But even here, the ripples of what had happened would reach them soon. Liesl's connection to the web Brennan was weaving, Britt's dangerous double game, Alexis's impending legal fight, they were all threads in the same tightening net. Jason stood at the edge of the pier long after the others had gone, staring out at the dark horizon. He knew Brennan's removal didn't mean the danger was gone. It only meant the clock was ticking faster. If there was one thing his life had taught him, it was that victories in this world were temporary, and the next storm was always closer than you thought. The night air shifted, carrying the scent of the sea and the faintest echo of footsteps somewhere behind him. Jason didn't turn. He didn't need to. Whoever was coming, whatever was next, he would face it the same way he always had, head on, no matter the cost.